"I thought I didn't need a man," the Apache woman told the rancher who saved her, and then, living on the outskirts of New Mexico, surrounded by dry hills, canyons, and open sky, she had made a home on a small patch of land she had inherited from her grandmother. It was not much, but it was enough. She had a modest cabin built of weathered wood, a few goats she had raised herself, and a tiny vegetable garden that stubbornly grew despite the harsh sun. Leela's life was simple, quiet, and controlled by her own rules. She thought she didn't need anyone else. Some mornings, the sun would rise in a brilliant orange glow over the horizon, and Leela would step outside with a steaming cup of coffee, watching the sky change colors as the world woke up. The birds would begin their songs, the goats would bleat softly, and the wind would whistle through the canyons, carrying with it a faint smell of sagebrush. She loved these moments, the calm, the solitude, the sense that nothing could touch her here. Independence was not just a choice for her, it was a part of who she was. She had learned early that relying on others could bring disappointment, and she had no intention of repeating old mistakes. One afternoon, after a morning spent tending her goats and repairing a section of fence damaged by a stray coyote, Leela decided to gather some firewood from a small grove near the canyon. The air was dry and hot, and the sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon. The grove was not far from her cabin, but the terrain was uneven, filled with loose rocks and patches of thorny bushes. Still, she preferred the walk over staying in the cabin. The movement, the sound of leaves under her boots, the rhythm of her own breathing, it all made her feel alive and capable. As she moved through the grove, she noticed clouds forming in the distance. At first, they were small, white puffs that seemed harmless. Leela barely paid them any attention, but within an hour the clouds had darkened and thickened, turning gray and heavy. A strange tension filled the air. The wind began to pick up, rustling the leaves in urgent whispers. Leela knew she should head back to the cabin, but she thought she could beat the storm. She had been through sudden rains before. She knew how to move quickly and safely. Pride, stubbornness, and a touch of defiance urged her forward. By the time she realized the storm was coming faster than expected, it was too late to turn back. The wind howled, and the first drops of rain hit her skin with surprising force. Leela's pace quickened as she climbed over rocks and under low-hanging branches, trying to reach the safety of the cabin. But then, a flash of water surged down the canyon she had to cross. A sudden flash flood, a wall of brown, rushing water that she had not anticipated, cut her off. Her boots slipped on wet rocks, her hands grasped at nothing but air, and for a moment panic surged through her. Leela was not afraid of hard work, of struggle, or of being alone, but this was different. This was nature's raw power, something she could not control. The water knocked her off balance, dragging her toward the edge of the canyon. She fought with every ounce of strength she had, but the current was too strong. She felt herself being pulled along, tumbling through rocks and mud, the world spinning violently around her. Her heart pounded in her chest. She screamed for help, but the storm drowned out her voice. Then suddenly she felt a firm grip on her arm, strong, steady, and real. Someone had grabbed her just as she was about to be swept away. A man's voice shouted above the roar of the water, telling her to hold on, to trust him. Instinctively, she did. He pulled her toward a small patch of land above the water's reach, and she collapsed there, gasping, drenched, and trembling. The man knelt beside her, checking to make sure she was all right. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and his clothes were soaked from the rain. His dark hair clung to his forehead, and there was a calm intensity in his eyes. Leela, still catching her breath, looked at him with a mixture of relief, surprise, and something else she did not want to name. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice steady and reassuring. She nodded, unable to find words. He introduced himself as Jake, a rancher who lived nearby. He had been checking on his cattle when he saw the storm and noticed her struggling. Without thinking twice, he had risked his own safety to pull her out. Leela's mind raced. She had always believed she didn't need anyone, that she could face any danger alone. But here she was, soaked to the bone, trembling from adrenaline and alive because of a stranger's courage. The storm continued to rage, and Jake helped her stand. He offered her a dry blanket from his truck and guided her back toward the path leading to her cabin. Leela's pride bristled at first. She wanted to insist that she could manage on her own, that she didn't need his help. But every step she took in the mud, every slip on the slick rocks, reminded her that sometimes even the strongest people need a hand. As they walked, the tension between them softened. Leela found herself observing him carefully. There was something quietly dependable about Jake. He did not boast about his bravery, nor did he make her feel small for needing help. His calm presence was reassuring, like a steady rock in the midst of chaos. For the first time in a long while, Leela felt a flicker of trust, small, cautious, but real. By the time they reached her cabin, the storm was easing. Rain still fell in gentle sheets, but the worst of the flash flood had passed. Jake helped her inside, making sure the firewood she had gathered stayed dry. Leela sat by the small fireplace, sipping a cup of tea she had hastily prepared, and watched him move around her cabin with quiet efficiency. He did not pry, did not ask unnecessary questions. He simply made sure she was safe. For hours they talked. Leela shared fragments of her life, how she had inherited the land, the goats, the struggles she had faced alone. Jake listened, genuinely interested but never judgmental. When he spoke, he told stories of ranch life, of challenges he had faced and small victories that mattered to him. There was a warmth in his words, a gentleness that Leela had not expected. Slowly, her initial resistance began to fade. By the time Jake left that evening, the storm had cleared completely. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold. Leela stepped outside, watching him disappear down the path to his truck. She felt a strange mix of emotions, gratitude, admiration, and an unfamiliar curiosity. For the first time in years, she realized that needing someone, even just a little, did not make her weak. It made her human. Leela stood there long after he had gone, reflecting on the day's events. She had always believed that strength meant independence, that survival meant solitude. But today, she had learned a quiet lesson. Courage could exist alongside vulnerability, and help could arrive in the form of someone willing to care. As the night settled in, Leela returned to her cabin and tended her goats, still feeling the adrenaline of the day. She knew one thing for certain. Her life had changed in a small but significant way. She did not yet know what the future held with Jake, or if she wanted it to hold anything at all. But she understood something essential. Survival was not just about strength. It was about connection, trust, and sometimes letting someone else in when you least expected it. Leela sat by her fireplace that night, wrapped in a warm blanket, thinking of Jake's calm eyes and steady hands. She whispered to herself, almost in disbelief, maybe I don't always have to do everything alone. It was a thought she had never entertained before, and yet it felt right. The storm had passed, the night was quiet, and for the first time in a long while, she felt both strong and strangely hopeful. The next morning, Leela woke to the soft light of the rising sun spilling through the small windows of her cabin. The storm from the previous day had left the air fresh and clean, carrying the scent of wet earth and sagebrush. Her goats moved quietly in the yard, and the gentle hum of nature reminded her that life, as harsh as it could be, continued. Yet despite the calm morning, a small part of her mind kept wandering to Jake, the man who had saved her life. She had always been fiercely independent. Dependence, she believed, was a weakness, a chain that could hold someone down. And yet something about Jake's calm strength and quiet assurance made her feel a strange sense of relief and safety. She shook her head, telling herself it was foolish to think so. After all, she did not need a man, or anyone really, to survive. but she couldn't deny that she felt a curiosity she hadn't felt in years. The day began with the usual chores. Leela fed the goats, checked the fences, and watered the small garden that stubbornly refused to die under the hot sun. As she worked, she noticed small damage from the storm, patches of soil washed away, branches torn from trees, and puddles scattered around the yard. Her hands moved quickly and efficiently, but the memory of yesterday's flood lingered in her mind. She realized just how dangerous nature could be and how alone she truly was in facing it. Later that morning, a truck pulled up near the edge of her property. Leela froze for a moment, unsure who it could be. Then she recognized the familiar figure of Jake stepping down from the vehicle. His clothes were dry this time, and he carried a small bundle in his hands. She felt a mixture of annoyance and relief. "I told you I didn't need help," she muttered under her breath, though not loudly enough for him to hear. Jake approached the cabin with a friendly smile. "Good morning, Leela," he said warmly. "I thought I'd check on you and bring some supplies. The storm left a bit of a mess, and I know it can be tricky to fix everything alone." Leela hesitated. Pride tugged at her, urging her to turn him away. But the sight of the small garden washed out by rain and the leaning fence made her sigh. "Fine," she said finally, stepping aside to let him in. Over the next few hours, Jake worked alongside Leela. They patched the fence, moved heavy logs, and cleared branches from the yard. His presence was steady and calm, never rushing, never impatient. Leela noticed how naturally he handled the work, how his movements were deliberate yet gentle, and how he seemed to understand the land in a way that made her trust him instinctively. As they worked, they talked, sharing small stories about their lives. Leela spoke cautiously, revealing fragments of her past, growing up on the land, learning from her grandmother, and the challenges of living alone. She didn't mention her deepest fears or the moments of loneliness she kept hidden from the world, but she allowed Jake glimpses into her life that she had never shared with anyone else. Jake listened patiently, never interrupting or offering unsolicited advice. When he spoke, it was in a calm, steady voice, sharing tales of ranch life, tending cattle, and the simple joys of small victories in a hard world. Leela found herself relaxing in his presence, appreciating the ease of their conversation. It was as though they were two people from different worlds, yet somehow perfectly in tune with each other. By midday, the sun was high and the air was warm. Leela suggested they take a break. She brewed a pot of tea and set 2 cups on the small wooden table inside her cabin. Jake accepted, and they sat in companionable silence for a few moments, sipping the hot tea and listening to the faint sounds of the goats in the yard. "Thank you for yesterday," Leela said finally, her voice quieter than she expected. She avoided looking directly at him. "I didn't ask for your help, but you saved me," Jake smiled softly. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I saw someone in danger and I couldn't just leave you there. That's all." Leela nodded, feeling a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. Pride was a hard thing to let go of, and she hated that she felt relief in having someone there to help. Yet, as she watched him quietly, she realized that the world felt a little less lonely when he was around. In the days that followed, Jake continued to visit Leela. Sometimes he came to help with chores, sometimes just to check if she needed anything. He never imposed, never made her feel weak, and never crossed the boundaries she held so tightly. Slowly, the tension in Leela's chest began to ease. She realized that having someone by her side didn't mean giving up her independence. It meant sharing the burden of life with someone who cared. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of the fence damaged by the storm, Leela spoke more openly than usual. "I've always done everything myself," she said, her hands working the hammer with steady precision. "I never wanted anyone to depend on me, and I never wanted to depend on anyone. It's complicated." Jake nodded, understanding. "I know," he said gently, "and you don't have to. But sometimes it's okay to let someone help. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." Leela paused, considering his words. She had never thought of it that way. Independence had always meant being strong, being capable, and never relying on anyone else. But now she wondered if strength could also mean accepting help when it was offered. Their days became a rhythm of work and conversation. Leela found herself looking forward to Jake's visits, not because she needed him, but because his presence made the hard work lighter, the long days more enjoyable, and the silence less lonely. She began to notice small details about him, the way he listened without judgment, the care he took with the animals, and the quiet humor that surfaced in unexpected moments. One evening, after a long day of repairing fences and feeding the goats, they sat outside on a fallen log, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange and pink, reflecting off the dry earth and rugged hills. Leela felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "I never thought I'd enjoy having someone around," she admitted quietly, her voice almost lost in the gentle evening breeze. "But it's not so bad." Jake looked at her and smiled. "It doesn't have to be bad," he said. "It can be something good. Sometimes we just need to let the world in a little, even if it scares us." Leela nodded, thinking about the storm, the flash flood, and the way he had pulled her to safety. She realized that she had been living in a protective bubble of pride and self-reliance, but Jake had shown her that there was strength in connection, in trust, and in letting someone care for you without losing yourself. The weeks passed, and the bond between them grew stronger. Leela began to share more of her life with Jake, the simple joys, the frustrations, the dreams she had kept hidden. In turn, Jake shared stories of his own life, the struggles of managing a ranch, the quiet moments of solitude he cherished, and the losses he had endured. Their conversations were honest and open, filled with laughter, understanding, and sometimes the comfortable silence of two people who simply enjoyed each other's presence. One afternoon, while they were repairing a broken section of the fence together, a sudden thought struck Leela. She had spent so many years believing that needing anyone was a weakness, yet here she was, finding comfort and strength in Jake's presence. She looked at him, saw the determination in his eyes, the ease with which he worked, and the genuine kindness in his gestures. And for the first time in a long while, she felt that maybe needing someone didn't have to mean losing herself. It could mean gaining something she had been missing all along. That evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, Leela sat on her porch, reflecting on the days that had passed since the storm. She thought about the fear, the struggle, and the relief she had felt when Jake had saved her. She thought about the days of work, laughter, and conversation that had followed. And she realized that life, even when harsh and unpredictable, could be brighter when shared with someone who truly cared. For the first time in years, Leela allowed herself to consider a new possibility, a life where she could remain strong, independent, and capable, but also open to connection, support, and even friendship, perhaps more than friendship. It was a thought that both excited and frightened her, but it was a thought she could not ignore. As the night settled in and the stars appeared one by one in the clear sky above, Leela felt a quiet hope growing in her heart. The storm had tested her strength, challenged her independence, and introduced her to a man who had changed her perspective without even trying. And though she did not yet know what the future held, she understood one thing clearly. Life was richer, fuller, and more meaningful when shared with someone who truly understood and cared for her. Leela closed her eyes that night, feeling the gentle breeze against her skin, the warmth of the day lingering in the cabin, and the knowledge that she was not entirely alone. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope, not for rescue, not for dependency, but for a quiet, steady companionship that might last a lifetime. The days grew longer as summer approached, and the sun rose early, painting the New Mexico hills with a golden light that made the land seem alive. Leela's routine remained the same, but life felt different now. The quiet moments she once spent alone had begun to include someone else, Jake. At first, she had resisted the idea, reminding herself that she did not need anyone. But she could not deny the comfort she felt when he was near. It was subtle at first, a shared laugh over a stubborn goat, a quiet conversation while repairing fences, or the way he seemed to notice what needed to be done before she did. Slowly she began to rely on his presence, if not his help. One morning, Leela woke early to tend to her goats. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. She moved quietly around the yard, letting the animals out of their pen. The work was familiar, soothing, and grounding. As she moved among the goats, she noticed a figure approaching from the dirt path leading to her cabin. It was Jake, carrying a small toolbox in his hands. "Morning," he said, a warm smile lighting up his face. "I thought I'd help with the fence before it gets too hot." Leela hesitated, the old pride rising within her. "I can manage," she said, though the words lacked conviction. "I know you can," he replied gently, "but two hands are better than one." There was no argument in his tone, no insistence, just a quiet offer. Leela found herself smiling despite herself. She nodded, letting him join her. Together they worked in a comfortable rhythm, hammering nails, adjusting boards, and checking for weaknesses. Words were exchanged in small bursts, laughter occasionally breaking the silence, but much of the work was done in quiet companionship. As they paused to rest, Jake leaned against a post and looked around. "You've done a good job here," he said. "Your land, it's strong." "Just like you," Leela's cheeks flushed at the compliment. "I've had to be strong," she admitted. "Life doesn't give you much choice when you're on your own." Jake nodded, understanding. "I know, and that's why it's okay to let someone in sometimes. Being strong doesn't mean doing everything alone." She looked at him, unsure what to say. His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that she had not expected. She wanted to argue, to insist that she could handle everything herself, but the memory of the flood and his steady hand stayed with her. She realized that there was a difference between strength and stubbornness. She could be independent and still allow someone to be part of her life without losing herself. Over the next few weeks, Jake's visits became a regular part of Leela's life. Sometimes he came to help with chores. Other times, he simply stopped by to bring supplies or share a meal. Leela noticed how naturally their lives began to intertwine. He knew which tasks needed attention, which goats required extra care, and when she simply needed someone to sit quietly with her. She did not feel controlled or smothered. Instead, she felt supported, understood, and for the first time in a long while, less alone. One afternoon, as they worked together to repair a small section of the garden fence, Leela found herself opening up in a way she had not before. "I've had a hard life," she said quietly. "Not always because of people, sometimes because of circumstances. But I've learned to survive, to protect myself, and to take care of what I have. And I thought I could do it all alone." Jake listened without interruption, his hands steady on the fence as he worked alongside her. "You've done a remarkable job," he said finally. "But even the strongest people need someone to lean on sometimes. That's not weakness, it's human." She looked at him, meeting his calm gaze. There was honesty in his eyes, a quiet understanding that made her heart beat a little faster. She realized that he was not judging her, nor was he trying to change her. He was simply present, patient, and willing to share in her life without demanding control or affection. As the summer days passed, their bond deepened. Leela began to notice small details about Jake, the way he laughed at her jokes, how he remembered the smallest tasks that needed doing, and the quiet way he watched over the animals. He was dependable, but he was also gentle. He respected her space and her independence, and yet he became an essential part of her day-to-day life. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat outside the cabin watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was ablaze with colors, shades of orange, pink, and purple reflecting off the hills. Leela felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. She realized that she looked forward to these moments more than she had expected. Having someone to share the work, the conversation, and even the silence with made life richer, warmer, and more meaningful. "I never thought I'd enjoy having someone around," she admitted quietly. "But it's not so bad." Jake smiled softly. "It doesn't have to be bad," he said. "It can be something good. Sometimes we just need to let someone care without losing ourselves." Her heart stirred at his words. They were simple, but they resonated deeply. Leela had spent so many years believing that needing someone meant weakness. But now, she was beginning to see that trust and companionship could coexist with independence. Strength did not mean doing everything alone. It meant knowing when to accept help and when to offer it in return. One weekend, Jake suggested a small trip to check on a part of his ranch a few miles away. Leela was hesitant at first, unsure if she wanted to leave the safety of her own land, but curiosity won. She agreed, and together they drove down dusty roads, past fields of sagebrush, and along winding paths that offered breathtaking views of the surrounding hills. During the trip, Leela began to share stories of her childhood. She spoke of her grandmother who had taught her how to care for the land and animals, how to survive in harsh conditions, and how to take pride in her independence. Jake listened, asking gentle questions and encouraging her to share without forcing her. It felt strange to open up in this way, but also liberating. She realized that her life experiences, which she had once guarded fiercely, could now be shared with someone who would understand and respect them. By the time they returned to her cabin, the sun was beginning to set. They sat outside, enjoying the cool evening breeze and the soft chirping of crickets. Leela felt a quiet happiness, the kind that comes from connection, trust, and shared experiences. She realized that Jake had become more than just a helper or a visitor. He had become a companion, a presence she could count on, and someone who had begun to matter in ways she had not expected. As the summer deepened, their companionship grew in small, meaningful ways. Jake would bring fresh supplies, help with chores, and sometimes just sit with her, sharing stories or comfortable silence. Leela noticed how much lighter her days felt with him nearby. She could laugh freely, talk openly, and even rest without worrying about facing the challenges of life alone. One afternoon, as they repaired a broken gate, Leela paused and looked at him. "I thought I didn't need anyone," she said softly, "but maybe I was wrong. Maybe needing someone doesn't make me weak, maybe it makes life better." Jake looked at her, a gentle smile on his face. "It doesn't make you weak," he said. "It makes you human, and it makes me glad to be here." Leela felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. She realized that the bond they were forming was not about dependence or control. It was about trust, care, and shared strength. She did not have to give up her independence to appreciate his presence. Instead, she could embrace it, allowing both of them to grow stronger together. That evening, as the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, Leela sat outside her cabin reflecting on the past few weeks. She thought about the storm, the flood, and the moments when she had felt helpless. She thought about the days of work, laughter, and conversation that had followed. And she realized that life, even when difficult and unpredictable, could be richer and brighter when shared with someone who genuinely cared. For the first time in years, Leela allowed herself to hope, not for rescue, not for dependence, but for a quiet, steady companionship that could last a lifetime. She closed her eyes, feeling the soft breeze against her skin, the warmth of the day lingering in the cabin, and the knowledge that she was no longer entirely alone. And in that moment, Leela understood something important. Strength and connection were not enemies. Independence and trust could coexist. And sometimes, letting someone in did not diminish her power. It enhanced it. Summer had passed, and the first hints of autumn were settling over Leela's land. The mornings were cooler, the sun lower in the sky, and the winds carried a sharp freshness that made her think of the coming winter. Life had grown comfortable, almost routine, with Jake's presence becoming a familiar part of her days. He was no longer just a helper or a visitor. He was a companion, someone who shared the work, the chores, and, in small ways, her life. But life, as Leela had learned, never remained simple for long. One morning, she woke to the smell of smoke curling faintly in the distance. At first, she thought it might be a campfire, someone passing through the hills, but as the minutes passed, the smoke grew thicker, darker, and more menacing. She could hear the faint crackle of flames, carried by the wind. Panic rose in her chest. Her goats were still in the pen, the cabin was close, and the fire was spreading quickly. Jake arrived just moments after she did, his truck kicking up dust as he pulled up. He jumped out immediately, assessing the situation with calm precision. "We need to get the animals and the supplies out now," he said. There was no panic in his voice, only focus. Leela's pride tried to rise, insisting she could manage alone. But as she looked at the fire creeping down the hillside, the wind threatening to carry it toward her cabin, she realized how quickly circumstances could overwhelm even the strongest person. For the first time, she felt the full weight of vulnerability. Together, they moved quickly. Leela rounded up the goats, guiding them toward a safe enclosure on higher ground, while Jake carried buckets of water and blankets to protect supplies. The work was frantic, exhausting, and dangerous. Smoke stung their eyes, ash fell from the sky, and the wind shifted unexpectedly, pushing the flames closer. Leela felt fear clawing at her chest, but Jake's steady presence kept her grounded. Every time she faltered, he was there, lending strength and assurance without ever taking control. Hours passed and the fire raged. The land she had tended for years was at risk, and for the first time, Leela realized how much she relied on Jake, not just for physical help, but for the calm, unwavering support that allowed her to keep going. They moved together in a rhythm that spoke of trust, experience, and shared determination. She began to understand that needing someone in moments like this did not make her weak. It allowed her to survive and protect what mattered most. By late afternoon, the fire was finally under control. The local fire department had arrived, and with Jake's help, they had managed to prevent the blaze from reaching the cabin. Leela stood outside, covered in soot and sweat, her chest heaving from exhaustion. She looked around at the scorched earth, the damaged fences, and the goats huddled safely on higher ground. She realized how close she had come to disaster and how essential Jake's help had been. For a long moment, neither spoke. The quiet after the storm was heavy, filled with the smell of smoke and burnt grass. Leela finally turned to Jake, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't have done this alone," she admitted. Her pride wavered, replaced by a raw honesty she rarely allowed herself to show. Jake smiled, though his face was streaked with ash and sweat. "I know," he said gently. "And you don't have to. That's what being human is, knowing when to ask for help and knowing when to accept it." Leela felt a warmth in her chest, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something deeper she could not yet name. She realized that her life had changed not because of the fire, but because of how she had responded to it. She had allowed herself to trust, to rely, and to accept companionship without losing her independence. Over the next few days, they worked tirelessly to repair the damage. Fences were rebuilt, burned patches of land were cleared, and the goats were returned to their enclosures. It was hard work, grueling in its physical demands and emotionally exhausting as well. Leela often found herself reflecting on the events, marveling at how fragile life could be, and how important it was to have someone by her side in times of crisis. During a quiet evening after a long day, they sat together on a fallen log near the cabin. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the hills and painting the sky in deep shades of red and gold. Leela felt an unfamiliar sense of calm amidst the chaos of the past days. She realized that the fire, terrifying as it had been, had also revealed something essential: the value of trust, partnership, and shared strength. "I never thought I'd say this," she said softly, breaking the silence, "but I'm glad you were here. I mean, not just for the fire, but for everything, for showing me that I don't always have to do it alone." Jake looked at her, his expression gentle and understanding. "I'm glad too," he said. "You're strong, Leela. But even the strongest people need someone to stand with them sometimes. That doesn't change who you are, it adds to it." For the first time, Leela allowed herself to fully consider what he meant. Strength did not mean isolation. It meant resilience, courage, and the wisdom to accept help when it mattered most. She realized that needing someone, allowing someone into her life, and sharing burdens did not diminish her independence. It enhanced it, making her stronger in ways she could not have achieved alone. In the following weeks, life slowly returned to a new normal. The fire had left scars on the land, but it had also left a sense of clarity for Leela. She began to see Jake not just as a companion or helper, but as someone integral to her life. Their bond had grown deeper, forged in the heat of shared struggle and mutual respect. Leela found herself laughing more, sharing more, and even planning for the future with him in mind. A future she had once imagined only for herself. One evening, as the air grew cool and the first hints of frost appeared on the hills, Leela and Jake sat by the fireplace in her cabin. The room was warm, the fire crackling, and the soft light reflected off the walls and their faces. Leela felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything they had experienced together: the storms, the fire, the work, and the quiet moments of companionship. "I've spent so long thinking I could do everything alone," she said quietly. "But I've realized that life is better when you have someone to share it with, and that doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." Jake reached across, gently taking her hand. "Exactly," he said, "and I'm glad we found each other. Not to change who you are, but to share the journey with you." Leela felt a warmth she had not known for years. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life that was not solitary, a life filled with partnership, trust, and shared strength. She realized that needing someone, leaning on someone, and letting someone care did not diminish her. It completed her in ways she had never imagined possible. That night, as the stars twinkled above the New Mexico hills, Leela lay in bed reflecting on everything that had happened. The fire, the storm, the fear, and the relief had all brought her to this moment. A moment of clarity, hope, and understanding. She understood now that strength was not measured by solitude, but by the courage to accept connection, trust, and love. And as she drifted off to sleep, she felt a quiet certainty that life, no matter how unpredictable or challenging, was worth facing together. With Jake by her side, she was ready to meet whatever came next, not alone, but stronger, wiser, and connected in a way she had never allowed herself to be before. Winter had begun to settle over Leela's land. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and frost, and the hills were dusted with the first hints of snow. Life had changed in quiet, meaningful ways since the fire in the fall. The land, though scarred in places, was stronger, healthier, and more cared for than ever. Leela had discovered a new sense of balance, realizing that strength did not mean solitude, and that connection did not diminish independence. Jake had become a part of her life in ways she never anticipated. The mornings now began with the sound of Jake moving around the yard, tending to the goats and the land. Leela would join him, her scarf wrapped tightly against the cold, her breath visible in the air. There was a quiet comfort in this routine, a rhythm that made the long, cold days of winter feel warmer. Together, they fed the animals, repaired fences, and prepared firewood for the nights ahead. Each day, Leela grew more aware of how much they complemented one another. She had her independence, her strength, and her land, and Jake offered support, companionship, and steady reliability. One morning, As frost glittered across the hills and the goats huddled together for warmth, Leela noticed Jake moving differently. He was quieter than usual, thoughtful, almost hesitant. She approached him, brushing snow from a fence post. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. Jake looked at her and smiled faintly. "Everything's fine," he said. But there was something in his eyes, a depth of emotion he rarely showed that made Leela pause. She had learned to read him over the past months, the slight tilt of his head, the way his hands moved, and the small changes in his voice. She waited, knowing he would speak when he was ready. After a moment he sighed, a gentle, almost nervous sound. "Leela, I've been thinking," he began. "We've faced a lot together this year, the storm, the fire, the land itself. And through it all I've realized, I don't just want to be here as a helper or a friend. I want to be here as more, if you'll let me." Leela felt a warmth spread through her chest. Her mind raced, recalling all the moments they had shared, the long days of work, the quiet conversations by the fire, the trust and reliance that had grown naturally between them. She realized she had already felt this way, though she hadn't admitted it to herself. "Jake," she began, her voice soft but steady, "I thought I didn't need anyone. I thought I could do it all alone, but I was wrong. And I've realized I want you here with me, not just for help, but as someone I care about, someone I trust." He smiled, relief and joy shining in his eyes. "I'm glad," he said simply. "I didn't want to rush you. I just wanted you to know how I feel and that I'm willing to face life with you, no matter what comes." The winter days that followed were filled with a new kind of closeness. Their work continued, but now it was accompanied by laughter, shared meals, and quiet evenings by the fireplace. Leela allowed herself to lean on Jake in ways she never had before, asking for help when she needed it, sharing her worries, and even allowing small moments of vulnerability. She realized that true strength was not about carrying everything alone, but about sharing life with someone who respected and supported her. One snowy evening, after a long day of moving firewood and feeding the animals, they sat on the porch of Leela's cabin, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun set behind the hills. The sky was a canvas of soft pinks and purples, and the snow glistened in the fading light. Leela felt a deep sense of peace. "I used to think I could do everything on my own," she said quietly. "But now I know it's better with someone who cares, someone who sees you and doesn't try to change you, someone who stands with you." Jake reached for her hand, holding it gently. "And I'll always stand with you," he said. "Not in a way that takes away your independence, but in a way that strengthens us both." Their days continued in this rhythm, working together, caring for the animals and tending to the land. They celebrated small victories like a healthy crop in the garden, and supported each other through minor setbacks, like a broken fence or a sick goat. Leela noticed that her laughter was more frequent, her steps lighter, and her heart fuller. She realized that life with Jake was not about dependence. It was about partnership, mutual respect, and shared responsibility. One afternoon, as they repaired the cabin roof in preparation for the deeper winter storms, Leela paused and looked at Jake. The sun glinted off the frost on the shingles, and the wind carried the crisp scent of pine. "You know," she said, smiling, "I used to believe that needing someone meant weakness, but now I know that trusting someone, letting someone share your life, that takes courage. And it makes life better." Jake smiled, his eyes reflecting warmth and admiration. "Exactly. You've always been strong, Leela, but even the strongest people can find strength in connection." The seasons changed, and with each passing day, Leela and Jake's bond grew deeper. They faced challenges together, the harsh winter winds, frozen water pipes, and the occasional stray animal, but each obstacle strengthened their partnership. Leela found herself no longer fearing the idea of sharing her life with someone. She realized that independence did not have to mean isolation, and that love did not have to mean surrender. By the time spring approached, the land had recovered from winter, and the hills were dotted with fresh green shoots and early blooms. Leela stood outside her cabin one morning, watching the sunrise, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had survived storms, floods, fires, and harsh seasons, but what mattered most was not the challenges themselves. It was the presence of someone who shared the journey with her. Jake joined her, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "Morning," he said with a smile, handing her a steaming cup. "Morning," she replied, taking the mug and feeling the warmth seep into her hands. For a moment they simply stood together, watching the sun climb over the hills, feeling the quiet power of companionship and trust. "You know," Leela said softly, "I never thought I'd feel this way. That life could feel full not because I'm strong alone, but because we're strong together." Jake looked at her, his smile tender. "That's what life is meant to be," he said. "Shared, supported, loved." As the weeks passed, they made small plans for the future, repairing old fences, planting new crops, and even talking about expanding the cabin to make space for a shared life. Each plan, each small act, was a symbol of their commitment to one another. Leela no longer felt the need to face the world alone. She had found someone who complemented her strength, shared her burdens, and stood by her side in both joy and hardship. One evening, as the sky turned to shades of orange and pink, and the stars began to appear, Leela reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the storm that had trapped her, the fire that had tested her, and the countless small moments that had built a bond between her and Jake. She realized that every challenge had led to growth, every moment of fear had taught her trust, and every act of kindness had strengthened her heart. Sitting by the fireplace, watching the flames dance, she whispered to herself, "I thought I didn't need a man, but maybe I did. Not to take my strength away, but to share it. To stand with me, not in front or behind, but beside me." Jake joined her, sitting quietly, letting her words sink into the warmth of the room. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic gesture, just the quiet, steady comfort of 2 people who had learned to rely on one another, trust one another, and care for one another. And in that quiet, Leela understood something essential. Love was not about possession, dependence, or weakness. It was about partnership, respect, trust, and shared strength. She had discovered that needing someone did not diminish her power. It enhanced it, enriched it, and made life more meaningful. As the night deepened and the stars shone brightly above the hills, Leela and Jake sat side by side, hands entwined, hearts aligned. The cabin was warm, the land around them safe, and the world outside vast and unpredictable. But within that quiet space, there was trust, love, and a shared sense of purpose. They had faced the storms together, weathered the fire, and embraced the challenges of life. Now they faced the future, not alone, not as strangers, but together. And for Leela, that was more than enough. It was everything.